The onesies were the first thing. 3 of them still in the bag tags on tucked behind the winter coats in my mother-in-law's guest closet. Newborn size. I wasn't pregnant. I hadn't even started trying yet. Ethan and I had talked about it maybe twice in that vague, someday way people talk about things they're not ready for. I found them looking for a spare phone charger on a Sunday afternoon in March, and I remember standing there in that closet a full minute doing math that didn't add up. I didn't say anything. Not that day. I told myself Ingrid was just excited jumping the gun the way mothers do. I put the bag back exactly how I found it, and went back to the dinner table and ate pot roast like my whole life hadn't just tilted 2 degrees to the left. I didn't know yet that my husband was seeing someone else. I didn't know my mother-in-law knew. I didn't know she'd known for months, and that in her mind none of that mattered as much as the one thing she wanted more than she wanted my marriage intact. A grandchild any way it came. I'm Sophia. I'm 31. And this is the story of how the 2 women who should have had my back the most, my husband's mother and honestly my own denial, worked together to keep me in the dark for almost a year. We had a good life on paper. A little brick house with a porch swing neither of us ever actually sat in. A dog named Biscuit who slept diagonally across the bed like he paid half the mortgage. Friday nights were takeout and bad reality TV, and for a long time I would have told you without hesitation that Ethan and I were solid. Not perfect. Solid. That word matters to me now more than it used to because I've learned solid can look identical to hollow from the outside. I work claims fraud for a mid-size insurance company. 6 years in. My whole job is finding the gap between what someone says happened and what actually happened, pulling timestamps, cross-referencing receipts, noticing when 2 stories that are supposed to line up don't quite. I'm good at it. I've caught fraud rings other investigators missed because I don't let a story go until the timeline actually holds together. I just never thought I'd need those skills at my own kitchen table. Ethan and I had been married 4 years. Together 6. He worked in sales, traveled some, had the kind of easy charm that made him good at his job and good at parties, and it turned out good at other things too. His mother, Ingrid, was the kind of woman people described as a lot, with a little smile like it was a compliment and a warning both. She'd raised Ethan alone after his dad left when he was 9, and she talked about that a lot, how hard it had been, how much she'd sacrificed, how family was the only thing that actually mattered when everything else fell apart. She wanted grandkids the way some people want a promotion. Openly. Constantly. At every holiday, every phone call, every single time she saw me in anything remotely loose-fitting. I didn't act on the onesies. Not right away. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was the kind of person who found fraud everywhere because I looked for it professionally, and that not every mismatched detail was a lie waiting to be caught. Ethan and I were fine as far as I could tell. Busy, a little distant some weeks, but fine. I didn't have anything solid, just a bag of baby clothes in a closet that didn't belong to me yet. So I waited. I told myself I'd bring it up when there was something real to bring up. That's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal. You usually see the edge of it long before you see the whole shape. And most of the time you talk yourself out of looking closer, because looking closer means you might actually have to do something about what you find. I remember the exact night I almost said something. It was a Tuesday, maybe 3 weeks after the closet, and Ethan and I were doing dishes side by side, him washing, me drying the way we'd done 1,000 times before. I had the onesies sitting right there in my throat, and I opened my mouth to ask, half joking, whether his mom was getting a little ahead of herself with the baby stuff. And then he turned and smiled at me, that easy, familiar smile I'd fallen for 6 years earlier, and asked what I wanted to watch after, and the moment just slid past me. I let it. I told myself there'd be a better time. There wasn't. There's rarely a better time. There's just the time you finally run out of reasons not to. The complicating moment came about 6 weeks later at Ingrid's birthday dinner. Amara, my best friend since college, the only person who ever called Ingrid on her nonsense to her face, was there as my +1 because Ethan had a work thing that ran late. Halfway through dessert, Ingrid grabbed my hand across the table, eyes wet, and told me that watching Ethan grow up without a real father had been the hardest thing she'd ever done, and that she just wanted him to have the kind of full, happy family she never got to have. She meant every word of it. That's what made it so hard to hate her cleanly later. She wasn't lying about wanting that. She was lying about everything she was willing to let happen to get it. I remember feeling for one confusing second actually sorry for her. Amara caught my eye across the table right as it happened. One eyebrow up a fraction of an inch, her signature look. For we're talking about this in the car, and later driving home, she said something I brushed off way too easily. "That woman loves y'all so much, it's a little scary," she said. I don't know. Something about how bad she wants this feels less like excitement and more like she's trying to fix something. I laughed it off at the time. Amara's always been sharper about people than I give her credit for in the moment, and only smart enough about it in hindsight. The escalation started with a receipt. By then it was late April, the kind of gray, drizzly Tuesday, where the whole house smells like wet dog and old coffee. And I was sitting at the kitchen table with a shoebox of receipts spread out in front of me like evidence at a crime scene, because as it turns out, that's exactly what it was. I do the family taxes have for years, since Ethan's about as organized as a junk drawer. And in April, I found a hotel charge 40 minutes from our house. A Tuesday night, he'd told me he was in Ohio for a client dinner. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I did what I do at work. I pulled the thread quietly and waited to see what else came loose. What came loose was worse than I expected. A second phone bill, a number I didn't recognize, texts I wasn't supposed to see on a laptop he'd left logged in. Her name was Kayla, someone from his gym. It had been going on since the previous fall, right around the time I realized later doing the math again that Ingrid had started buying onesies. I thought finding proof of the affair would be the worst part. It wasn't. The worst part came 2 weeks later, when I finally worked up the nerve to tell Ingrid, thinking, God help me, that she'd be as blindsided as I was, that we'd be united in this. And instead of shock, I watched something close behind her eyes. Not surprise. Recalculation. Like she was doing the math on how much longer she could keep something running that she'd already known about. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I had to. She wasn't surprised. My mother-in-law was not surprised that her son was cheating on me. And the question that opened up in that silence wasn't, does she know anymore? It was, how long and why didn't she tell me? And eventually the one that actually broke something in my chest, what did she want out of not telling me? I didn't get the full answer that night. I got a version of Ingrid I'd never seen, flustered, talking fast, saying things like, it's not my place, and I was hoping it would pass. And you know how men are at that age. I let her talk. I've interviewed enough people who are lying to know that the more someone over-explains something you didn't ask them to explain, the more there is under it. I need you to understand something before I keep going, because it matters for everything after this. I didn't leave that conversation angry yet. I left it careful. 6 years catching people in stories that don't add up teaches you that the worst thing you can do is confront someone before you actually have the whole picture. So instead of blowing up, I did what I do for a living. I built a timeline. For the next 3 weeks, I lived a kind of double life myself, which is a strange thing to admit. I went to work. I filed claims. I sat across from strangers who'd patted a fender bender into a total loss payout and caught every one of them calm as anything because none of it was personal. Then I'd come home, kiss my husband hello, ask about his day, and spend an hour after he fell asleep going through bank statements on my laptop in the bathroom with the fan running so the light wouldn't wake him. There's a particular kind of loneliness in investigating your own marriage. Nobody warns you about that part. I pulled hotel records against Ethan's expense reports. I cross-referenced Kayla's social media check-ins against the same dates. I laid it all out on a legal pad the way I would for a case file, and what I found stopped me cold. The affair had started in September. Ingrid had found out, I still don't know exactly how, whether Ethan told her in some moment of guilt, or she'd figured it out the way mothers figure things out sometime in October. And the very first baby item showed up in her house according to a receipt I found tucked in a drawer during a visit on November the 3rd. She'd found out her son was cheating, and within 4 weeks she'd started shopping for a grandchild that didn't exist yet, with a marriage she knew was already broken. I read that timeline over maybe a dozen times that night, sitting cross-legged on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m, and each time I hoped it would add up differently. It never did. Numbers don't do that for you no matter how badly you want them to. That's the part of my job most people don't understand. It's not that I'm good at finding the truth. It's that I've trained myself not to look away from it once I have. I sat on that legal pad for 3 days before I did anything. Not because I doubted it. Because once I acted on it, there was no version of my life that looked the same again, and some small, stupid, hopeful part of me wanted one more Sunday dinner where I got to pretend I didn't know. The Sunday I finally went to confront her, I sat in my car outside her house for almost 10 minutes first. Not because I was scared, because I was making sure I had it right, every date, every receipt, every text, the way I'd want to be sure before I ever brought a case to my supervisor. I watched her through the front window, moving around her kitchen, humming to herself, completely unaware that the woman sitting in the driveway had spent 3 days turning her into a case file. I remember thinking, she has no idea I already know everything. The porch light was already on. Even though it was barely 5 in the afternoon, Ingrid always did. That said a dark porch made a house look like nobody loved living in it. I sat there another minute, just looking at it, that stupid yellow bulb, and thought about every Sunday dinner I'd walked toward it, not knowing what I know now. Then I picked up the folder off the passenger seat and went in. When I finally went in, I didn't lead with the affair. I led with a question, flat and quiet. When did you find out about Kayla? Ingrid didn't answer right away. She just looked at me for a second too long and said, I always thought you'd make a good mother even before, and let the sentence hang there unfinished like she expected me to fill in the rest myself. Before what, Ingrid? That's when her voice cracked just slightly, just once, right on the word before, and I watched her hands go still on the counter like she'd forgotten they were there. Not tears. Not yet. Just a woman realizing the story she'd been telling herself for almost a year had finally run out of room. Before I knew there wasn't going to be one, she said. I thought if there was something to look forward to, something good, maybe it would fix itself. Maybe he'd come back around. Men do stupid things, Sophia, and then they come home. You knew in October, I said. It wasn't a question. You knew, and instead of telling me you started buying baby clothes for a marriage you already knew was over. She didn't deny it. That was almost worse than if she'd tried. She just said very quietly, I didn't want to lose the only thing that ever felt like a family to me. I thought if there was a baby, none of it could fall apart. Not really. Family doesn't leave Sophia. Not the way men do. He's a good man, Sophia. She said quieter now, like the fight had gone out of her all at once. He gets scared same as his father did. I thought if he had something to be scared for, he'd stop running. Her voice caught again on stop, and for a second she looked every bit her age standing in that kitchen in the same cardigan she'd worn to every holiday I could remember. For 1 second, just one, I saw exactly why she'd done it. A woman who'd been left once already trying to build something so permanent it couldn't be undone again, using the one tool she had, which was hope she had no right to hand out on my behalf. And then the moment passed, and I was just furious standing in a kitchen I used to feel welcome in, looking at a woman who'd let me plan a future, with a man she knew was already gone. Almost a year earlier, back before any of this started, she'd handed me a box of her own mother's old dish towels in this same kitchen and said, Here, every family needs to hold on to something. I hadn't thought about it in months. Standing there now, I picked up the folder of receipts and texts I'd printed out, the whole timeline laid bare in black and white, and set it on her counter in almost the same spot. Here, I said, every family needs to hold on to something. She didn't touch it. I want to tell you the whole thing ended there in that kitchen with some clean, satisfying finish. It didn't. What ended there was the version of Ingrid I'd been willing to forgive things from. What came after the part nobody got to see that day was smaller and it took longer to land. It wasn't until a week later, going through my own emails to make sure I had copies of everything for myself, that I found the piece I hadn't told Ingrid I had. Amara, the friend who'd sat next to me at that birthday dinner, who'd watched Ingrid squeeze my hand and talk about family like it was sacred, had actually been the one to first notice Kayla's name on Ethan's phone months before I ever found the hotel receipt. She hadn't told me right away either. She'd been trying to get proof first, the same instinct I had, because she knew that if she came to me with a rumor instead of a fact, I'd never have believed her over my own husband's mother smiling across a dinner table. Amara had been building her own quiet file the whole time, terrified of being wrong, terrified of blowing up my marriage over a hunch. When she finally handed me what she had, dates, screenshots, a name, it filled in the last 3 weeks of the timeline I couldn't account for on my own. I almost told you at the birthday dinner she admitted sitting across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once dried dishes and swallowed a question. I had it half typed out as a text like 4 different times. I just kept thinking, what if I'm wrong, and I'm the reason her whole marriage blows up over a guess? She reached over and squeezed my hand, the same gesture Ingrid had used months earlier for a completely different reason. I'm sorry it took me so long to be sure enough to say it. It wasn't the confrontation that broke the case open in the end. It was 2 women independently refusing to say something out loud until they were sure, and one of them finally trusting the other enough to hand it over. I moved out 2 weeks after the birthday dinner that started all of it feeling different, though the actual leaving took another month to sort out logistics, at least the unglamorous parts nobody puts in the story. Ethan didn't fight it much, which told me something too. Ingrid called 4 times that first week. I didn't pick up. Here's where I actually am now. I don't hate Ingrid the way I thought I would. I hate what she did cleanly and completely, and I don't think that will change. But I understand it in a way that makes it worse, not better. She wasn't a villain twirling a mustache. She was a scared, lonely woman who thought a grandchild could weld a family back together that was already coming apart at the seams, and she was willing to let me walk further into a broken marriage to get one. Knowing why doesn't undo what it cost me. I still don't know if I'll ever sit at a table with her again. Family gatherings used to feel like the safest rooms in my life, and now I walk into any room full of people who love each other and wonder quietly who already knows something I don't. I don't have a neat answer for that yet. Some days I think I'll never fully trust a family dinner again. Other days I think that's exactly the kind of thinking that lets people like Ingrid win twice, once by lying and once by making me too afraid to ever let anyone close again. I honestly don't know which one is true yet. Maybe I won't know for a while. Amara still checks in most weeks. Biscuit came with me, that was never even a question, not for Ethan, not for anyone. Some nights the new apartment feels like exactly enough. Other nights it feels like a place I'm just waiting in until I figure out what I actually believe about family and whether the version I grew up wanting was ever really on the table to begin with. What I do know is this. The onesies are still in that closet as far as I'm aware. Tags on, waiting for a family that isn't coming, and some nights that image is the one that stays with me longest, not the affair, not the confrontation, just 3 tiny outfits nobody's ever going to wear bought for a hope that was never really mine to begin with.